Welcome to this Spain online event. I'm Jenny Godfrey, and I'm the author of The List of Suspicious Things. And I'm so pleased to be in conversation today with Paula Sutton, the author of the fabulous new cosy crime novel, The Potting Shed Murder. Now, as you'll already know, Paula is the face behind Hill House Vintage, with over 500,000 Instagram followers. Named by Vogue as the happiest influencer on Instagram, Paula is a vintage hunting interior stylist, author, columnist, and television personality, showcasing her wonderful cottage core and cozy Norfolk live through a lens. And now she's turned her hand to crime fiction. Welcome, Paula.
Oh, thank my goodness. Who did all that? Thank you very much. That was a very, very lovely intro.
Well, you deserve it. I mean, this is some portfolio you've got, Paula. And now you've added crime fiction onto it.
Absolutely.
So can you tell us a bit about the novel? What's the Potting Shed Murder about? I mean, the clue is in the title.
The clue is in the title. The Potting Shed Murder. So I moved to Norfolk 15 years ago, and from London. So I had my career in London. I moved to Norfolk, and the main protagonist of the Potting Shed Murder is a woman very similar to myself called Daphne Brewster, who has moved from London with her family to rural Norfolk, and it's about her finding her way, finding friends, learning how to negotiate the new politics of village life and living in it's a sort of group of a few villages, which is very similar to how I live now. And she makes friends and she makes not so great friends. And somewhere in the middle, there is a murder occurs, and somebody that she cares for the finger is pointed at that person. And Daphne Brewster takes it upon herself to root for the underdog and to try and nosy her way into working out maybe whether it was the friend or whether it was somebody else who was responsible, was the culprit for the murder. So it's basically a very classic cozy crime. And I have to say, it really is a cozy crime. I'm not into blood, guts and gore so much,
No.
But I do like having the old magnifying glass and looking for clues or trying to see if people slip up or accidentally sort of let some sort of clue pass. I love that sort of crime busting mystery myself. So that's hopefully what it is.
And you've described it perfectly, because I've spent my weekend with the people from Pudding Corner, and I would really describe it as a really classic whodunit. And clearly it's inspired by your own experience. What else inspired the novel?
Do you know, it's really funny because I would almost go back to when I was in the sixth form at school. So sixth form in your senior school in England is when you're 17, 18. And we, at the end of our school period, we had we called it the sixth form review. So we'd have to either do short plays or I don't know, a piano recital or something for our parents and the school and the teachers. It was a convent, so the nuns at the time. And I wrote a murder mystery. I was obsessed with Agatha Christie and Agatha Christie films and all the adaptations. And I wrote a murder mystery, and it was the classic cheesy, murder. Somebody has wields the dagger at the end and all of that sort of stuff. And I had all of my friends play all the parts, and it was all set in the 1920s. And it was part Great Gatsby, part Agatha Christie. And so I feel I have always had this love of a good murder mystery crime in me. I'm absolutely gutted because I don't know where the script is now, but I do remember having all of my friends come to my attic in my family home, and we would rehearse in the attic of my house, of my family home. And I had such fond memories of that. But I definitely feel that this must have been going around my brain for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is the fulfillment of a childhood ambition.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
wonderful. That's wonderful. Um, Now it does feel, I mean, Pudding Corner, that feels like a quintessentially English
Oh, yeah.
setting.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it is a quintessentially English story.
Mm.
And at the same time, it really celebrates diversity.
Yes.
How important was it for you to do both in the novel?
Oh, totally. It was incredibly important because I don't think, for me, as somebody who really does enjoy a good murder mystery, whether it's a literary sort of a wonderful book or something traditional, or whether it's in film, it's a film adaptation, um, you don't often see a person of color as the main protagonist. I think, things are changing. Obviously, they are. And, I'm not necessarily by any means a trailblazer here. But for me, I hadn't seen enough representation as the main protagonist. You see characters and you read characters, and but I definitely needed it to be reflective of me. And
Yes.
I felt that my situation, a black woman from South London who had moved to the English countryside, um, was at the time unique enough for people to ask me back in 2010, not that long ago, but 2010, lots of people said, how was it? How did you find it? Gosh, was it different? Was it sort of unusual? Was it difficult? And so I felt it was, there's nothing better for representation than just having stories told where people are diverse and people come
Yes.
from all walks of life and people of all colors, shapes, and sizes, etc. And so, even though the focus of the story it's not a story about race, but race comes into it purely because the main protagonist is a black woman. And so for me, it's the sort of story, I love all sorts of stories, but it's lovely
Yeah.
to have something in the cozy crime genre that is reflective of my personal situation. And I knew from the questions I've been asked over the years that there would probably be people who would appreciate identifying themselves in this sort of genre as well. But on top of that, as I say, it's not purely about race, so everyone can enjoy it. It's not meant to
Yes.
be sort of the sort of book that is it's not, the messages are there, but the messages are not, and I'm not bombarding people with the
No.
messages, but they are there because in real life, this is how we are. That we live in a very diverse society, and it's lovely to see all sorts of different flavors and aspects of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is unusual, especially having a black woman protagonist
Mm.
in a cozy mystery. In fact,
Yeah.
I don't know of any other
Mm.
that I certainly
Yeah.
have read. But what I really enjoyed was all of the female characters are different, unusual, diverse. It's a real mixture.
Mm.
Could you tell us a bit more about the female characters, from Daphne to Minerva to the Warburton sisters? Tell us a bit more about the women in the book.
Well, the women in the book are all strong characters. I
Yes,
hope you found that. But they're
really
all
did.
strong characters, and I love all of them, even the ones who aren't so lovable. And
Yeah,
some of them don't have the most lovable traits, but they're all fighting, or they're all purposeful for a reason. And whether that reason is a good reason or a bad reason, they all have their reasons for their strong characters. And those characters can often clash, and those characters can often look as if they're detrimental to other people apart from themselves. But once again, I think that's how life is. And I did find none of the characters are an exact copy of somebody that I know or somebody that I've met over the years. However, they're all an amalgamation of several people that I've met over the years, not necessarily in Norfolk, but whether it's back in my London days or in Norfolk or back in my childhood, there is a little piece of lots of different people within all of those characters. And that was honestly, the most immense amount of fun is remembering little sort of situations and having little anecdotes that popped up in my brain as I was writing. And I remembered, the character of of a neighbour that I had when I was growing up, back in South London when I was 10. I would remember something that my neighbour said back then. It's amazing what the brain remembers and picks out when you're starting to characterize people and when you're starting to formulate a story. Because of course the brain remembers everything. We don't think it does, but it's all catalogued in there, and there's all these sort of like multi-layers of memories in there. And so all of those strong female characters are definitely part of my history and my background and my and the backdrop of my life. So they were great fun to write, and it was lovely to give these strong women a voice and humor and importance and a tricksy nature in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know I've been asked this question before, and it's really difficult to answer, but do you have a favourite?
Do you know, it's well, you know how hard that question is, because even some of the characters who might not be the most pleasant can often be the most fun to write, can't they? So
100%.
you end up loving them because of how questionable they are. And so I've loved them all in equal measure at different times, I think. I particularly love the Warburton sisters.
Yes.
But then at the same time, I can identify in many parts with someone like Minerva. I came to a small village. I didn't know anybody. I had my 3 young children. I walked into, I didn't know what sort of reception I was going to get. It was lovely, by the way, and it was all wonderful. But I remember feeling, when I'm comfortable and when I'm settled, I can be quite a confident person, but but I've got a shy side as well. And so I call myself a sort of introverted extrovert, because I can be extroverted, but I can certainly be very withdrawn and into myself. And Minerva is that sort of character. So I can really understand how you can become this almost like a wallflower in a situation that feels slightly intimidating, which sometimes the school gates can feel very intimidating. So I love her for her shyness and for her reticence and her even though she's lived there most of her life, because I identify with that. But then I love, of course, the boldness of Daphne coming into this situation and being a little bit more forthright, and holding her own and being polite, but wanting to make sure she's not walked over as well. So so there's a bit of me in all, and and there's humor in some of the characters, and I love that.
Yes, so. Well, I was actually going to say, so my favourite character is Marianne Forbes. I love her. I just love her. And I was watching a Waterstones video where you were talking about your love for Jane Austen.
Oh, yes.
Which I share wholeheartedly.
Oh, yeah.
And what I loved while I was reading The Potting Shed Murder was it's got that kind of same dry humour, particularly in depicting the characters and their foibles. And you describe, this just for me was brilliant. You describe Marianne as Marianne Forbes had the look of the type of woman who took great pride in being compared to the late Princess Diana. Now, that gives you such a brilliant picture of exactly who Marianne is. Was that a deliberate choice by you, the kind of Austen-like observations?
Yes, well, I'm once again, I'm obsessed with Jane Austen, and absolutely adore the comedy of manners and the characters who feel that they're doing the right thing, but in actual fact they're doing the most awful, unimaginable sort of like act of cruelty. And the person who is supposed to be altruistic, who is actually being the most sort of mean-spirited person ever. You often find those sorts of characters in Austen, and that's so much of human nature. People who are are often sort of like the loudest the loudest people who can criticize others or who feel that they're owed something are often the people who, you know, they're not the most generous in spirit. And to me, that is such an interesting character to write. It's such a that sort of waspishness, that sort of selfishness. It's a wonderful observation, and observing that with a little bit of humor thrown in, I think. And you know, and I have met people with some interesting ideas over the years, and a lot of that character has been, you know, inspired by people who had strong ideas about their sense of self, their sense of self-righteousness, and their sense of entitlement, and they didn't see any of that coming from themselves. So those characters are fascinating, you know, fascinating.
Well, you do it with such fantastic humour. I found the characters in particular a great source of comedy. They're really fantastic. Now, as well as the rich cast of characters, the Potting Shed murder is really cleverly plotted. So it's got quite a few twists and turns, some of which, and I won't obviously do any spoilers, but some of which had me go, no! Like, I was so surprised by some of the turns it took. And, you know, I'm a writer too. That's trickier than it looks. How did you find putting such a complex jigsaw together?
I had the framework of so writing a novel, as much as I've always wanted to do it, and I had actually attempted to write novels before, but I realized, because I can be quite a chaotic creative person, so I'm sort of like I'm like the there's that film, that cartoon Up, where there's a dog, and the dog will be talking as they do in cartoons, and then suddenly it'll go squirrel, you know, or bird, or then I'm like, that's how my mind works. So I'll be concentrating on something, and suddenly I'll be like, oh my god, gardening, or oh my goodness, cake. You know, there's always something going on. So I realized early on that I had to have a structure. I had to have a proper structure. I couldn't just write from A to Z. I had to have a structure. So I knew exactly chapter to chapter. It did change along the way, because as you're writing within that frame, you know, ideas come and the ideas evolve and things change. But I had that structure, and but some of the twists came from getting to know my characters, and almost having that character evolve. And as the character comes to life, the motivation of why they are a certain way sometimes used to become obvious to me as they were coming to life on as I was typing. And there are other times when I would literally wake up in the middle of the night and have to, and annoy my husband, have to turn on my phone and start, and because a piece of dialogue or a piece of characterization would suddenly pop into my mind. And you know, I hadn't gone to bed thinking about that or that particular scene, but I would suddenly see a piece of dialogue or a reason for a situation come in, and I'd have to type it down quickly, because I mean, as you know, as a writer, often you have to get it down straight away, don't you? Because
or it's gone.
I don't know if it's as a writer or whether it's just my time, my stage in life.
No.
But if I don't write it down, sometimes that amazing idea is lost forever. And I've learned my lesson now. Don't expect it to be there tomorrow morning. So so occasionally it would be that's why, that's what happened. So there were a few little twists that were, I would almost call them organic. They just came.
And actually, I think that really shows, because it feels so sort of natural and organic as you've just described it. And the subconscious is an amazing thing. So, you know, clearly that's really worked in your favour here. So as a resident of the English countryside myself, albeit in Somerset, one of the other things I loved about the novel was it feels like a real celebration of both landscape and kind of lifestyle. Now, I'm guessing that was intentional and something you really wanted the reader to experience through your eyes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I really wanted. As I say, I moved to from London to, and very, urban South London, to Norfolk 15 years ago, and even now there are certain corners and certain roads and lanes that I'll go down, and I'll see a great expanse of fields, and it takes my breath
Yes.
away. And I know it's coming. I know, I've traveled that road, hundreds, if not thousands of times, but I will still suddenly feel at peace and suddenly feel, wow,
Yeah.
I've come home. This is where I'm meant to be. And I really wanted to translate that into words and into my book. I wanted that feeling that even though Daphne was somewhere that she perhaps hadn't expected to be, if when she was growing up, maybe she wouldn't have thought she'd end up in the countryside. But it was this feeling of loving your surroundings, just falling in love with where you are and having this sense of belonging. And I wanted to get that across because that's how I felt when I moved to Norfolk, almost instantly. There were ups and downs. As with every single thing you do, there were always going to be teething problems. There's often a bumpy ride before you find your groove and before you find your feet. But not once did I think I'd made a mistake. I didn't ever feel, gosh, I want to return to London. And I think that love hopefully is written into the book in how I describe the surroundings.
Oh, it really, really, really is. And it made me sort of think about, I had the same experience at moving from the city to the countryside. And I just really enjoyed that celebration. The other thing you do, by the way, which I'm not so happy about, is make cake very attractive.
Cake is very attractive. It's cake is one of my great loves.
I can tell every time I turn back to reading, somebody would be having a delicious cup of tea and a piece of cake that you would describe in a way that would make me go, I
Oh
need to go
yes.
and get a cup of tea and a
Oh,
piece of cake.
absolutely, absolutely. It's a book to have a cup of tea and a slice of cake
Yes.
by, isn't it?
It really, really, really is. I love it. So as well as the business of obviously solving a murder, we've already referred to some of the themes in the book, like, I mean, there is a comedy of manners in there. Keeping up appearances is quite important, but there's also tolerance and acceptance and allowing people to be who they are without ever, by the way, being preachy in any way. Um, was it really important for you to weave some of those themes into the narrative?
Absolutely, they were. I think my whole presence on social media is supposed to be uplifting, and it's meant to be happy, and it's showing these sort of joyful situations, me having a picnic and me setting a table in the garden. And I'm very aware, and that's on purpose.
Yeah.
It's something that brought me joy, and it's something that really brought me joy through some hard periods of my life. So it's intentional, and I know it brings a lot of joy to other people. So, but I also know that life isn't a bunch of picnics, and life isn't or you can't always mend everything with a cup of tea and a slice of cake. I mean, almost everything, but not quite
Almost.
everything. Almost. I do try. And I'm very aware of that. It's sort of I didn't want anyone to feel that that I'm not aware of that. Life is hard. There are so many issues and so many conflicts and awful things going on in the world. And it's very easy sometimes to assume that social media can ignore those things. And I think with the book, even though the book is a light take on life and is a cozy crime, I didn't want to just skirt over real
Brilliant.
situations and real things that can occur. And there will always be issues with the comedy of manners, with people wanting to one-upmanship, or with people whether they fit in, or somebody who doesn't look like you moving into a certain space and how is that dealt with, or with changes in the school curriculum, or changes in the thoughts around teaching about diversity. And I felt that needed to be reflective in it almost brings it to the present day rather than keeps it in the 1950s.
Yes, because it does feel modern. You're absolutely right. That's lovely. And actually, you've touched there in your answer on a question I was really curious about, because as I said in my introduction, and I'd also read the Vogue interview with you, in which you talk about your incredibly positive outlook and cheerfulness, which made me really curious about why murder.
Do you know, and quite a few people have asked this.
Yes.
I think that there's nothing more. I have a sense of humour.
Yes.
You know, I love a laugh, and I love to, and even through all of the picnics and all of the flowers and everything, I try and inject a sense of humour and a little bit of sort of coquettishness, and in there anyway. There's always going to be a nod and a wink wink, because I don't take myself that seriously. Even when I'm flinging the skirts and when I'm sort of like walking through a field, I'm not sort of really believing I'm in the flake advert. It's not because I'm thinking, my goodness, look at me in this wonder. It's all very much a nod to fantasy, and a nod to a sort of joyful and bucolic sort of fantasy world almost. And so why murder? Sorry, in answer to your question, there was a part of me that just thought, I can do the prettiness, the lots of fun cake and the jolliness, but life has edges to it. Life has not so nice moments to it, and I want to deal with that in my own way. So as I say, there is a lightness to it, but of course, murder is never funny. Murder, somebody is harmed or hurt when there's a murder, and of course there are people who are left behind. So I felt that it was lovely to have this sort of like coziness and this sort of cottagecore wonderful world, but with a dose of reality thrown in. I thought that sort of like that mixture was quite important for me. I didn't want it just to be this fantasy of perfection where nothing bad ever happens. Maybe one day I'll write a children's book and that will be that theme. Bad will ever happen. But for this, I felt I needed for my sort of for the tiny little cynical part of my brain, and it is there. I felt that there had to be a little edge to any novel that I wrote.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, great answer. And to be fair, all the crime writers I know are the loveliest, funniest people. And usually the darker the book, the funnier the person. So I actually, I get it. I was just very curious, obviously, having looked at your kind of brand and your Instagram page. What do you want people to leave or feel once they've read The Potting Shed Murder? How do you want to leave the people who have read it?
I love the idea of people immersing themselves in a new world of Pudding Corner and the sort of surrounding villages. Because whenever I've read a series of novels or a huge tome of a novel, I don't know, The Hobbit or something, when I was younger, I just immersing yourself in that world is so wonderful, and you get to love the characters, and you get to want to know what happens next. And I would love people to leave The Potting Shed Murder wanting to follow Daphne's adventures in the future. I really would love them to want to get to know Pudding Corner and get to know Pepperbridge and get to know those characters, and start imagining it. I want a map. I want people to actually be able to do the map
Love
of
it.
where everything is.
Yeah, love it. And actually, I was going to ask this later, but I'm going to ask it now because it just seems logical. Are we going to hear more from Daphne and the people of Pudding Corner? Is that the plan?
Absolutely. I can't let her go that easily.
Great, because
She,
I want to know more about James and her
yeah,
children. There's
absolutely.
so much mileage in this
Oh, completely.
village.
I think we've sort of only sort of like touched the edge of who Daphne is really, because she was she has been finding herself within this book.
Yes.
And she hasn't established herself yet. It took me several years I ended up being a vintage trader, but that took a while. I came to Norfolk searching for what I could do next that would be compatible with bringing up my young children. And in a
Yeah.
way, this is Daphne's same journey. She is wanting to create this new life for herself, and that means negotiating friendships and as well as sort of like her, getting the children sort of immersed the into village life, and that takes a while. So
Yeah.
all of this sort of like crazy storyline that's been going on is all happening within the space of a year, or within a year. So there's a much more of Daphne to sort of to evolve and grow with her
Yeah.
new life.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to hear we're going to get more. Um, and that does lead me on to, have you had any people in your version of Pudding Corner worry that they're in the book? That's happened to me with people going, is that me?
No one's asked me directly yet, but a lot of people have asked whether they're going to be in the book.
Of course.
I think secretly people want to be.
Yeah, oh, totally. And I don't think they mind, even if it's not that
No,
positive
no.
portrayal, as long as they're in it. Yeah.
I think we'll probably get a lot of people in your book too who claim to be that person, and you'll be thinking, no,
Yes.
you're not.
Yeah. It's got nothing to do with you. Yes. Now you are, to put it mildly, a bit of a style icon,
Oh.
Paula. I'm really interested in, because I love the colours, I love the design of the cover. Um, how much say did your publishers give you in it, given that you have such an aesthetic yourself?
It was my publishers were amazing actually.
Yeah.
They got my aesthetic down to a T completely. Um, Even the idea of it's almost like wallpaper inside, and the idea that it was sort of like this
Yes.
wonderful sort of like floral. It could almost be on the walls of Hill House.
Yeah.
And the colours were so sort of. I love colour. If you look at my home, it's all about colour.
Yeah.
And so it was very important that it was a beautiful book, even though it's the potting shed murder. I wanted it to be a thing of beauty, and so the whole process was a joy. But they were so great in sort of nailing exactly what it should feel like.
Yes, and I do. I mean, I have to say it is a beautiful looking cover. Um, and actually that leads me on to, obviously you've referenced Hill House.
Mm.
You have an incredibly busy life. I mean, what did I say? It was influencer, interior designer, television, writer, non-fiction writer. How this is a personal question. How the heck did you find the time to write a novel?
Do you know, something happened to me when I turned 50? I think it coincided with my mother passing.
Yeah.
And that had a very profound effect on me. Also, it was lockdown. So it was the beginning of lockdown
Yeah.
as well. So there were several things that happened all in the space of a short period of time. And rather than have it all those things defeat me, it made me think, goodness me, I've really got to grasp life by the hand and really go
Yeah.
for it. And I remember I came back from my mother's funeral. She was buried in the Caribbean in Grenada, where she's from. And I went straight back into lockdown. I didn't see it coming, but we in the March came back, and I think within a week, schools had closed, everything was locked down. And for my own sanity and for me to not be dragged down by sadness and the loss of my mother, I went hell for leather to finding joy and creating this and really pushing the boundaries of this imaginary world and this, and I started baking the cake and growing the flowers and creating the kitchen garden and really it was things that I'd been doing already, but I was really sort of pushing the limits of finding as much beauty and writing and doing all the things that I'd wanted to do that I'd been scared about doing or pursuing, because fear holds us back so much. And I like anyone else, I felt well, I'd love to write, but I'm not a writer. I'd love to design a dress, but I'm not a designer. And as I say, something clicked, and I remember because I'd written articles for magazines before, and I'd had a few bits of writing, but I wouldn't dare call myself a writer. And at that stage, I thought, I'm going to put it in my bio that I write. And I'm going to make a decision that this is what I want to do, because it's what I want to do. It was my secret passion, but I didn't dare say it. And something shifted at that time, at that period. When you put things out there, people, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, people take you at face value. They see, if you say that you're this, they will go, right, okay, she writes. Would you like to write this article for the magazine about your home or your sitting room or your garden or whatever? And suddenly it was almost as if I'd opened these floodgates to opportunity and people seeing me as something different. Whereas before I'd been hiding and I'd been shy and I'd be sort of like, oh, I'm not going to dare put myself out there, but if something comes my way, then fine. But life isn't about waiting for the bus to come. You've got to go out and find the taxi, or you've got to go out and find things. And so at that point I sort of started going and grasping things. And I remember I don't do New Year's resolutions. I tend to have themes, so I'll have one. And I remember in 2021 my theme was yes. Just say yes to things.
Oh wow.
And so I am busy because I chose to start saying yes to things, and saying yes opens up so many doors and opportunities, and your instinct might be, oh my goodness, well, I don't know how to do that, I couldn't possibly do that or go there or whatever. But once you're telling yourself, say yes first and then deal with it afterwards, it's amazing where you find yourself. So it was an exercise in sort of almost making myself more confident and believing that I could do things that secretly I probably knew I could do, but I was so used to categorizing myself as somebody who had a creativity, but I wasn't able to do that or this, or I'm not as good as that person, or I can't call myself a writer because I've not written a novel, or I haven't done this. I've only written a few articles. I've written for a magazine or something. So it was about sort of shifting my mindset. And once I did that, things started happening, and I started enjoying those things rather than being scared. And so, yes, I am busy. I'm busier than I left London to just sort of wind down and slow down, and the countryside was meant to be the sort of calm oasis, and I now find myself busier than ever before. However, I'm busy on my own terms, so I do things that bring me joy. But also my children have grown up. That's another big thing. My children are now in their 20s, and when I first moved to Norfolk, they were little things, and that was the decision to move to Norfolk was about being present with my children. But there did come a time, which sort of coincided with around lockdown, when they were beginning to fly the nest, and it was sort of like, oh right, gosh, how does this next stage of my life look? now that the reason we came here is starting to disappear.
Yeah.
And so now it's sort of like a hybrid of enjoying this wonderful country lifestyle, but with a bit of sort of like excitement thrown in every
Yeah.
so often, and a lot of saying yes, because life is short.
What an incredibly inspiring woman you are. That was just wonderful. Gosh, I feel like I'm gonna go and conquer the world now after that.
Absolutely.
That's so wonderful. It really is. And you also obviously published Hill House Living. Was that in 2020?
Yes,
Did
yes,
that help in terms of, because it's quite a transition to writing whole books.
yes.
Did that help or did it hinder?
It did help because Hill House Living was it was like writing my blog. So I started my blog in 2010, and that was really, it literally was a diary of me being a South London woman who'd moved to the countryside. We'd bought our house and spent all our money on the house, and so we had to fill these rooms. And the best way of filling the rooms beautifully and sustainably and solidly, because I didn't want to throw away furniture, was to start buying vintage and to upcycle things and to repair things and to find all these little antique shops. And I'm not talking about antiques in the sort of, you're at Sotheby's and you're putting the hammer down on something that costs thousands. I'm talking about sort of those old curiosity shops where things are dusty and dark and piled high. So I got my sort of like vintage bug, having to fill the house cheaply, and with what we could afford. And so Hill House Living was all about finding my love of nature and finding my love of gardening and finding my love of living with the seasons and upcycling and recycling. And even though a lot of it is filled with recipes and how-tos and describing how to look for antique furniture and vintage furniture, the thread that ran through it was the story of my life and how I got to Hill House and what brought me to this situation. So in a way, I'd written my own story about moving from South London to Norfolk in a very sort of limited way, because it was only a few chapters. Everything else was more about sort of the things that you find on my blog and on Instagram. But writing that part of Hill House Living very much informed me of how to write Daphne's move from London to Norfolk. So the two things ran parallel, but then of course Daphne Brewster, Pudding Corner, and the Potting Shed Murder leave off and go into fantasy world. But it did help, sort of just writing that timeline certainly provided, paved the way.
Yeah, because storytelling is storytelling, right?
Yeah,
so yes,
absolutely.
you almost had some practice.
Yeah.
So who would you say the Potting Shed Murder is for fans of? Who would you hope picks it up from the bookshelves?
I would, well, probably the best way I could describe it, and my goodness, this is not me comparing myself to this.
No, it's fine.
I love Death at Pemberley. So the mixture of your Jane Austen and then your Agatha Christie style, and James, it's sort of like that whole combination of it's all beautiful and light and what we expect from Austen, but there's a murder and there's sort of like there's a little bit of, it's a bit sinister, but there's a bit of humor. I think if you're a fan of that sort of amalgamation, then maybe, but also there's the obvious sort of the cozy crime, amazing titans that is Richard Oseman and the Reverend Richard Coles. Although I have to say, I'm going to be honest here. I purposefully stayed away from those books until I'd written mine, because I didn't want to subliminally get sort of any ideas or or any themes from their books. So I'm now getting stuck into all of those, and that was a conscious decision to not be swayed by anybody else's version of a cozy crime.
I think that is a very, very wise idea. And it means that the novel has a style and a voice all of its own.
Yes. Yes.
So I completely understand. Now, do you have an imaginary cast for the television show in your head?
Do you know, I've been asked this before, because somebody asked me who would I get to play Daphne Brewster if it was on television. Do you know, I actually, to this day, I don't know. I don't know who. I mean, I would love, let me start off by saying, it would bring me no greater joy than to see these characters come to life on the screen.
Yes.
My, how amazing would that be? But I don't know. I mean, just so sort of like a boring answer, isn't it? But my goodness, what fun would it be to see this happen?
It would be a hoot. And I have a casting suggestion for you, which is Crush Jumbo as Daphne. I think she'd be amazing.
Amazing.
That's who I see in the role.
I would love that. I would love that. What fun, though. What absolute fun to see these characters. Do you imagine sort of who would play your sort of protagonists?
Yes. Now, my protagonists are younger, so it's a bit more tricky. However, there is a role for Harry Styles in the adaptation of my book. Yeah.
Brilliant. We need to make that happen.
Oh, completely. I very much hope so. So, I mean, the last question, really, I think you sort of answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway, just in case you're going to surprise me. What are you working on right now?
Well, book 2 is in the offing. So, it's very exciting times at the moment. So Daphne is living on. And I loved that, because I always wanted it to be a series. I didn't want to leave her there. I think she's too good a character, and I think the world of Pudding Corner is too good a place to be left behind with just one story. So that is sort of a major part of my life, but also I have so many layers because I'm having fun. I'm having a lot of fun at the moment.
It comes across.
And so it's sort of I'm living this accidental influencer life, which truly accidental. For starters, I'm 55 this year. I'm not sort of your average person who works in social media. Which, once again, I think it's very important that I'm here and doing it. There are a lot of women of a certain age who are doing this now, but there was a time when I first started. I went on to Instagram, I think 2013. I hardly saw anyone over the age of 25. And in the beginning, I thought, well, this isn't for me, because I'm not showing my coffee and I don't really care about what my breakfast looks like. I'm not going to take a photograph of it. And it was only when I saw a friend who I used to work with in magazines, Charlotte Ann Fiddler, who was showing her beautiful garden and her lovely sort of very historic house. And I thought, oh, there's a little piece of the internet for people like me who like looking at old things. So that's how I got started. But it was all, the first 5 years, I don't think I showed my face at all. It was my dog Coco, who's a chocolate sort of Labrador cross with a Doberman. And Coco was the face of Hill House Vintage. It was all about interiors and furniture and my dog. And so when I say that I accidentally got into this, it really is genuine. I didn't sort of think that I would be, showing my face and sort of like flinging the skirts up on my front doorstep and holding cakes in my hand at all. But there's lots more of that to come, because I'm having far too much fun. And I think it's good for people to see all ages. As I say, as you mentioned with the book, it's all colours, all ages, all abilities, all, it's important for us to see a variety of people reflected in what we see in social media, and social media has taken over, it seems. So it's important that I stick around, and that people like me stick around, and that lots of people stick around. So yes, you'll still see me, coming out with the odd crazy cake.
Well, I'm pleased to hear it, and long may it continue. Paula, thank you so much for such an interesting and inspiring conversation. And please do get your copies of The Potting Shed Murder wherever you buy your books.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been a joy.